Welcome back to Behind the Scene, the podcast where we uncover new perspectives, hear stories that challenge your views, and discover the invisible threads that humanize us. After a 2-year hiatus, we're thrilled to reconnect and dive back into the heart of the conversations that matter most to connection. I'm Branden Polk.
And I'm Mark Bauer. In this episode, we're exploring the personal and societal upheavals we've experienced since we last talked. From reflections on identity and navigating new landscapes to the broader challenges we encounter amidst race, faith, and political divisions.
We're also addressing the current state of our world and how these events reflect our deeper issues of trust and leadership. Here, we can foster meaningful dialogue and grow despite our differences.
Join us as we explore the nature of these divided times and seek to wrap our heads around what it means to live with dignity and compassion. Let's dive in.
Hi, Mark.
Hey, Branden.
We're back.
We're
doing
back.
this again. I don't know how long it's been. How long has it been?
It's been like 2 years, at least. I think. What year are we in?
The year of our Lord.
The year of our Lord. I think, yeah, it's been 2 years at least. Do you want to catch people up on where we are, what we're doing? What even is this?
Yeah, we did this. I mean, a lot's happened in our lives, definitely, since we were recording Behind the Scene, however many years ago now, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We were just reminiscing about how we used to do this, which was around a singular microphone in your house in DC and put up mattresses around the house so that it would muffle the sound. A lot of shit has happened. So, I don't know. I don't know how much you want to share. I'm going to try and push myself and be a bit vulnerable with that thing that people do. We're still going to talk about all the things that Behind the Scene is about, but I think we've evolved because we've evolved, or the podcast has evolved, and the content will evolve because we have evolved and gone through some things.
No, that's right. It's been a couple of years since we've recorded, and we both have just been going through a lot of life transitions. And when you're sitting down to talk about racism in society, you need to have a certain degree of vulnerability or just groundedness, to be able to dive deep into those kinds of conversations. And we didn't have the bandwidth, especially after COVID disrupted so much. And I also don't know that so much was happening with the Black Lives Matters marches over COVID. We had another election. And so I think for me, it was the feeling like I kind of just want to see where the dust settles. We were a little early to the conversation when we started recording in 2019. And I say that, of course, we've been talking about racism for so long.
Did we start recording in 2019?
Yeah.
We met for the first time on your birthday. I didn't know it was your birthday. We conceived the podcast on that day. We were introduced by a mutual friend. Shout out to Tiffany. But if not for that, we wouldn't be here today. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there was a lot that was going on in 2019. Well,
yeah, 2019, a little early to the conversation in terms of sitting down. And, again, I want to be careful saying that because people have been talking about this for a long time. And but I think things reached kind of a fever pitch in 2020 and 2021 around this topic with some of the police shootings that were occurring, and things like George Floyd. I think those were the things that were bringing the conversation to the surface and exposing people to the question of like, what are we doing? For the first time, if you're not exposed to that, that question might not be banging around in your head as much. And so social media obviously made that more accessible to people, exposed them to that. And as a white person who's just catching up to the conversation, I had a lot to learn and still have a lot to learn. And but that's the point of this podcast, is to examine, and try to understand more, try to always understand where our biases are and where we can be better at understanding one another and seeing the human dignity in everybody and understanding what action or inaction in my life might be contributing to systemic issues or, contributing to just how I might dehumanize someone that I pass on the street. And so for me, coming back and recording, life is still a little chaotic. I was supposed to, I moved back to Texas from DC a year ago, and now I'm spending the summer here in DC. So, and then Branden, you've moved to New York after, your home was in DC for the longest time for so many years. And you moved to Brooklyn, and, I don't want to steal your thunder, but over the last couple of years, you've gone through a lot of life change yourself.
And after 12 years in DC, I bought a condo in Brooklyn and moved. And the hard knock school of life, I think, just kind of happened, in 2020. Yeah, you're right. There was the contagion of racial reckoning and racial unrest to match the contagion of sort of COVID and that whole pandemic situation that was going on and still going on for a lot of folks. But, for me, I had reached a point where I was like, wow, my community's changing here after 12 years. People are moving. It's not bad. It's just that things that people would have been doing maybe in 10 years, they were all of a sudden doing in 2 years because of the rate of personal growth, or things that needed to come to the surface were coming to the surface because you're just sitting at home trying to, I don't know, contemplate the meaning of life or something, or what you want to do, how you want to contribute, or trying to dig yourself out of the throes of depression and anxiety because work was the excuse to not have to deal with things that people were doing. I think I was going through both of those. There was a lot of innovation going on, but there was also a lot of reckoning within myself about who I am and who I want to be. And everyone else is moving on and away. And, I could stay here in DC and build a life. And, but after 12 years, I still didn't feel like I had rooted, for whatever reason. And so I wasn't running away from, I always had a lot of FOMO about living in New York City. I'm a theater kid through and through, so always wanted to be in New York and do the Broadway thing, even if it was just to be in close proximity to dramatic things, given the melodramatic sort of way my life is, just the way that I process and communicate, always over the edge. But I had sort of dealt with that, in some ways. And, COVID, while it was a quarantine, I'd felt this sense of like, I'm in a cocoon, that while I was sitting in one spot for most of the time, not going anywhere, somehow this growth was happening, and it was pulling me not to run away from DC, but to go where I could grow. And it was like the spirit saying, go north, old man. So somehow all the stars aligned, and that's what happened. But, I think in getting here, to your point, the unrest in the country became more entrenched. I'd say that unrest around the globe, obviously, in some ways and in some ways not. But personally, moving to a new city, navigating through some of the discontent that I had with the conversation that I have around the conversation about race and difference, and being different at the same time, being a part of communities that I think for the most part I was being compliant in, and not being 100% authentic. So it's one thing to be Black. It's one thing to be an ordained person, right? Sort of a person in the cloth or in the faith, and have been since I was a youngster. And then to be politically homeless in a way, but not religiously homeless, but then becoming religiously homeless because of the way that, some of the binaries around faith and, were kind of shaking up. And then myself feeling, whether or not I was or not, but really feeling like an outcast, because I wasn't understood as being Black, for being Black in certain circles, and some of the disgruntledness I had around some of the subjects. And then being gay in conservative America, which is something that, people have, known about me, but I have not been as open about in certain contexts, right? It's one thing to, and that's a whole other subculture type of conversation, but there's just been a lot of people with a lot of opinions about my process of integration. And that integration has caused a disintegration or a sense of shaking in some of the other relationships and communities that I've been a part of. And so it's just been challenging. But I'm good, and we're here. We stayed connected. Had a conversation in Texas a year ago. Go figure. It wasn't even a year ago, because we hadn't seen each other in person because we were displaced out of DC. So we were just, talking or whatever, but stayed connected, and then had a conversation about, what, I think we have some things that we might want to say, or maybe people would be open to listening to us again, or at the very bottom of it is that we could process as we do, and maybe get some clarity about our lives and our contribution, and what does it mean to be here in this moment. So
yeah, and you talking about that, one of the things we discussed earlier on with behind the scene was, we're jumping into the conversation about race, but really the whole conversation can be about any kind of identity issues and identity politics and how we understand one another and being exposed to the other, and in predominantly norm culture in America, which is white, straight, Christian, maybe less so, but that's the normative culture that we find ourselves in. And so early on, we discussed bringing sexuality into the conversation, because it's still, everything that we're trying to learn and understand is about how to just relate to one another better, because we're kind of terrible at it. And so, yeah, no, this squares right into that. So you just came out, behind the scene. I'm sorry it wasn't Ellen that you could
it
come out
wasn't
on,
Ellen.
but
And it's like a weird thing. It's like, did I feel like I was coming out? I mean, I don't feel like I came out. I feel like other people came into knowledge, about
yeah.
something. The conversation about race, opens up a conversation about equality, period, or opportunity, or how to manage differences, and about being curious and being open to people that are different. And I remember saying this, in the earlier days of behind the scene as well, which was, the conversation about race is a worthy one on its own. The challenges, the evident hypocrisies in the founding of not on the principles of the country in and of themselves, but in how people as leaders showed up, in being able to live up to those principles. It didn't happen. There was a lot of hypocrisy in living up to those founding principles. And that showed up mostly in the infraction around slavery and then civil rights and things like that. And of course, we have manifestations of those things still showing up today. But then that conversation about race opens up into a much broader theory or philosophical conversation about what it means to treat people with dignity across the board when you don't agree, but also when you just don't understand, And I think that's really what's happening, is that people think they understand, they're not curious. So yeah, the conversation about race, but now you look in sort of the landscape of the conversation it is about gender, is about sexuality, it is about, being, trans or drag or, whatever it is, and so it's not just CRT, critical race theory people are talking about. Now people jump the gun into kind of maligning people in ways that stoke violence and whatever, sort of against people just for trying to be authentic. And yet, and this is where the people will, sort of get on us, I think, Mark, which is the extremes on the other side are equally as abhorrent, right? So no one's innocent, and no one is operating in, very few of us are operating in humility. And I think, I have to raise my hand and say, when I think I'm great at this, take the social worker part of me, the therapist part of me, the, whatever, parts of me that are supposed to be good at this. When I get pulled and when I get tested and someone does something or says something, I'm at that same fork in the road. Do I want to say something I shouldn't say, do something that I wouldn't do, to someone, and how much of that, am I entertaining, the violence of fist or violence of tongue because I feel so threatened, by the opinion or the existence of someone else, and what our leaders don't do is they don't admit that they have that going on. Instead, they posture and pontificate. And I just don't want to be a part of that. I'd much rather us model what it means to really be humble and vulnerable about our own weaknesses on all of this and expose it, So I have that going on, and it's not stuff I want to talk about.
I think when we first started recording, there was a little bit of naivety in me where I thought that if you spoke honestly and truthfully about your perspective, that there would be a lot of grace given to you if you just weren't the most elegant about it, or if you maybe stumbled around the issue, because it's like getting your feet or your legs under you if you've been atrophied. And I think the more I've been exposed to power cultures in DC and in Los Angeles and New York, the more I realize that there's not as much forgiveness or margin for error as I thought there was. And so there's a real danger in speaking about the topic. And for me, when we started talking about recording again and having conversations, some of the things we were talking about was what kind of content can we be putting out on social media as we kind of just get back into the mindset for this conversation, because it's not something that I've given a lot of thought to. I've kind of gone on a lot of news diets. I don't consume a lot of news. I'm not on Twitter very much.
Good for you.
I see the big things that pop up, but I think I've been trying to really kind of heal some parts of me. I had a death in my family almost a year ago now, and some of that was around identity issues. He was a gay man, and he just felt the weight and ugliness of the world. And we don't have to get into it now, but healing from that, recovering from that, and trying to understand where was I complicit in how he felt, and growing up. And so there's just a lot there that as we were coming up with some content for social media and Juneteenth and getting back in the exercise of like being contemplative around this topic, I'd realized that I was like, where am I in this conversation, and what do I even, what am I bringing to it? What am I doing on a daily basis other than just trying to be as good of a person as I can be, and a kind person and considerate and a good neighbor. But I really realized that like I've kind of just been on the sidelines, and that's okay. But in gearing and ramping up for this season, trying to just get your finger back on the pulse of where we are individually, sure, but also where are we as a culture and a society where we just distrust of one another seems to be at an all-time high. And the people who would broker the conversation normally in the media, distrust of the media seems to be at an all-time high as well, especially if you're, more right-leaning, maybe not as much if you're left-leaning. And so it's difficult. And we also have to remember that we have geopolitical issues as well, where we have Russia not just meddling in elections with disinformation, but how much are they also trying to stoke and sow division in our general populations, and how much of what we can trust online that we think we're seeing, ugliness that is contributing to our angst, and we can point to the other side and be like, see, I knew I was right about you. How much of that is even accurate when we have geopolitical, forces at work as well? So it just kind of seems to be like this chaotic mess that why would anyone want to step foot in it? And so what I committed to a year ago is really, honestly, I wanted to grow a garden. Like that's what I had planned for the summer. And
A real garden?
was this a real garden, an actual garden?
Not the garden of your heart, just
not the garden
a
of my
garden.
heart.
A garden
I was
with,
like,
well, now I
man,
want to know what's in the garden. I mean, what are you going to put
I
in
just
the
want to
garden,
play in the
Mark?
dirt, vegetables. And so a real emphasis on tending your garden. You know, there's like an actual garden, but also like tending to yourself and making sure you're okay first and foremost. And this year has been a lot of good surprises to it. You know, like I said, I'm back in DC for the summer. Whereas I'd anticipated being in Texas tending a garden and maybe having some goats and chickens. That just didn't pan out. But that's where I was, you know, my mind frame. And so coming back and trying to jump back into this and get a pulse on things, I'm realizing that man, that really is a muscle that you have to consistently work and be mindful of. So from your perspective, you know, you're not allowed to step out and sit on the sidelines necessarily like I am, because it's something you're living your everyday life. So what is your sense of where we are as a country in this conversation?
Thanks for sharing, Mark. I mean, just where you've been at too. And I think that there's room for respite, you know, for taking a break. And there's a degree of that, you know, that I feel like I've been able to do. You know, I think just, you know, the nature of just being in a new move, or rather in a move to a new city and in transition, right? There are just things that, you know, I wouldn't have otherwise been focusing on because I was proactively moving, you know, and just trying to settle and build friends or make friends and build relationships and all that. So that comes with its own degree of complexity for all the reasons that we're talking about, you know, here too. But where do I think we are? Well, I mean, I'm not happy with where we are, but I'm not discouraged either, right? So maybe I'm an eternal optimist in that sense. I see people every day being courageous with their lives, how they treat other people, how they are working to gain insight and, to use your point, you know, to tend to their own garden, tend to their souls. I see people and hear back. I get to be a part of that as a practitioner, you know, as a coach every day, you know, being able to sort of, you know, be with people as they are the CEOs of their own lives, you know, and coming into agency and understanding, you know, what their inner lives are really like, and then taking responsibility for becoming transformed individuals who are principled and want to do good and are doing the best that they can. So that gives me hope all the time. Now, do I feel like that's at the scale, you know, that I think we need for a global citizenry or manifestation of love in the world? No, I don't think we're there yet. But I also don't think we'll get there until it gets bad enough. Like, I know this is probably like a Southern saying, you know, that, you know, you won't until you're tired of being tired, or you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, you know, whatever, you know, that's the only time when you really feel like incentivized, you know, to make a change. And if we're talking about the West or the United States in particular, I just don't know if we're sick and tired of being sick and tired yet. You know, we haven't hit rock bottom. It's curious to me, the timing, you know, always our timing of recording. It's Tuesday, July 16th, 2024. And on Saturday, July 13th, former President Trump was nearly assassinated. And this is the height of something that we haven't seen. I mean, we literally haven't seen an assassination attempt like this since 1981. I was literally born in 1981. And I don't have the visceral memory of Ronald Reagan being shot, but I know the story of it, you know, because I was, you know, coming into life, you know, and know how important it was. I was born in a Ronald Reagan presidency. But if that's any indication, of our inability to navigate and wrestle with the conversation about race in America, which is really a conversation about hypocrisy against the principles of the country, which are really principles of what it means to do, what's called the golden rule, right? To do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? That's really what we're dealing with here, is a lack of social cohesion as a result of a really low reality, or the lowest of social trust measures. That we're needing to wrestle with why that is. And I think that what is at the heart of the problem, what the media won't tell you, and what pastors won't tell you right now, and what other leaders and institutions won't tell you, is that those leaders and the leaders in those institutions are fundamentally the problem. We won't put ourselves on the chopping block and basically say that we're the ones that have created or contributed in a significant way, us and the people that watch us. What we say, what we do, how we live, we aren't incentivized to live up to the shit we say we're about. And until that happens, things are going to get worse. I'm not seeing humility in us enough yet. I think the possibility is there. I see the embers of it happening, but it's only when we react. It's not because we have the insight. We have knowledge that something is wrong. I mean, to your point, Mark, like, you could turn on the news right now, and every 30 seconds, someone is going to say, we're the most divided we've ever been. Someone's going to say that, but knowledge is not the same thing as insight, right? Knowledge is just data, but insight is internalizing that knowledge and seeing yourself in the storyline, taking responsibility for what you are, not just contributing to that problem, but how you need to transform as an individual in order to contribute to the solution. And I'm not seeing that across the board. We have a leadership problem, and I think we have a spiritual problem in the country. And until that gets rectified, we're going to continue to have challenges, and it won't be rectified until it's incentivized. And right now, the structures are incentivizing the opposite, not what we need. So that's where I think we are. That the conversation about race, as important as it is a smokescreen away from having the conversation about how bereft of principled living and leadership people really are.
And so when you put it that way, my eyes kind of just glaze over.
You put it that way.
I'm like, dang, all right, well, we can turn off the mic and go home because nothing is going to get done, right? And so it does feel like a heavy lift. And you said that you're not discouraged. And as you're saying that, I'm like, man, how can you recognize just so many roadblocks and barriers to getting to a more beloved world, more beloved community, when all that is standing in the way? It just feels so insurmountable. Because even if you have people who are modeling a little bit of humility or meekness, and boundaried people who are kind of trying to stand in the gap, you have so many other voices who point to that as weakness, and they point to that as failed leadership. And so it's like damned if you do and damned if you don't. It's like it's kind of what it feels like. And so why aren't you discouraged? I don't. What's your secret sauce? One, just looking so youthful question. As an old man, but
looking youthful. I get on airplanes and I moisturize. That's what it is. And a healthy dose of Botox. Never hurt anybody with brown skin. Or it's better for the people with white skin. So take your appointments now at the Botoxist, right? Get the lines at the top. I'm going to ask you the same question, if you are optimistic or not, or where hope comes from. I mean, I have a framework for what it means to be a spiritual person right now, which is not about religion. That's not about any particular religion or faith that people have. But I think I needed to arrive at a framework for what it means to be spiritual because of some of the deconstruction around religion that I had to do, the reconstruction around religion at my own faith practice, and then restoration in that practice. So take that as a framework. number one, right? It's fine to deconstruct, but please reconstruct and restore yourself, right? Unto what would be a spiritual practice and framework. That framework, I think, is in three parts. One, I was made and I had nothing to do with it. I don't know how I got here, except that I was made, I was created. Somebody or something did it, so people can disagree about, the ways in which things are made, whether it's the Big Bang or whether it's Jesus, Christ or, Elohim or Al Sada or, whoever. So that's number one, though, is that everyone is here not because we made ourselves or because we were made somehow, right? Number two is that we're sustained. Somehow, a lot of things in the world have to work together at the same time in order for us to move and walk and be and exist in the earth from moment to moment, right? So the earth spins on its axis, the universe is held in its place, oxygen is made up of the ingredients of what oxygen is made up of, and all of that is happening concurrently at the same time above the pay grade of any one human being, right? And that's an existential thing to be curious about, right? That you were made and that you're being sustained. So I'm already like, what's going on, right? If those things are true. And then this last bit, I kind of screwed up with it a bit. And I thought that if 1 and 2 are true, then it must mean that I have purpose, right? That if I'm made and that I've sustained, that I must have a purpose. I have a reason for living. And then I sort of sat on that for a while, and then I realized that all I was doing was leaning into sort of a meaning making or validation for like performance in order to feel better about myself, right? So basically, if you're listening to this today and you think that because you are leaning into your purpose or searching for your purpose, that somehow you are not doing that out of an incentivized approach to love yourself, most of us are probably wrong, right? We think we're leaning into purpose, but really we're looking for validation and love and connection and belonging through being successful at something, right? So I was wrong about number 3. So instead, to answer your question, why am I hopeful? Why am I optimistic? Because I was made and I had nothing to do with it. Because I'm being sustained and it's being controlled whether I want to do it or not. And 3, it's not that I have purpose. It's simply that 1 and 2 are true because I matter. I just matter. And I'm not appreciating in value. I'm not depreciating in value. I just simply matter. And it's from that insight that I can apply to every person that I meet and come into context with, or any person that I think is motivated by hate, right? This is not so much love your neighbor now. It's not us versus them. It's us or them. It's learning how to love your enemy. But how do you do that if you don't fundamentally believe that every person that is your enemy, quote unquote, doesn't matter? Matter can neither be created or destroyed by me. Interesting, right? This is the language of it, right? I want to destroy the matter that I don't like. But when I realize that it's not in my control, then I cannot destroy the matter that I don't like. I can't create it because I didn't create it, so I can't destroy it. So if we ever disagreed about anything, which of course we never do,
Never.
or if we ever entered into an enemyhood, about our friendship, right? And parts of me want to be the most evil and enact the most egregious tactics in order to feel better about the situation. I'd have to violate. I would have to violate my own conscience, or my own understood reality of the fact that I matter in order to dehumanize you, right? So I have hope because I know it's not. There's something going on that is above my pay grade that's holding us all together. And as Martin Luther King Jr. said, that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. And one of the things justice is not unbalanced scales, right? It is balanced scales, but the only person or thing that keeps it balanced is the thing that made us and sustains us and made us matter.
And maybe that's the title of this episode then is just what's the matter?
Ooh, what's the matter?
What's the matter? We're gonna have to go back and edit. Because to your point, not only do you matter, but there's so many things in our culture that point to the fact that you don't matter. and um, and not just you as as who you are, but I'm talking about like the things I consume tell me that I'm not enough. They tell me I'm insignificant. If I go on the dating apps, that's a very commoditized thing to find a
Don't bring it
partner.
up, Mark. Don't
Oh,
bring it up.
baby. And so we have all these messages that are telling us that we don't matter. And so we're all experiencing this existential dread about like, am I good enough? Do I matter? And I think the mirror that is the world is holding up to us is that we don't. And so I think we're kind of in this place where if I don't matter, you don't matter, right? You can't matter because I don't matter. And we're all trying to jockey for the same attention, the same proof that we're worthy. And then we kind of just take it out on one another, right? Like there was, when I was back in Texas campaigning, there was one woman in particular that I spoke with, and the conversation stands out to me because we got on the topic of immigration and whether she was for it or against it. And, of course, it's not just that black and white, but one thing that she was so distressed about is she was a single mother. And she said, I worked so hard to put food on my table and provide for my kids. And I go to drop them off at school and they're wearing, these Payless shoes, and they're wearing like the lowest in terms of value, status symbol kind of clothing. And she's dropping them off at school and she sees immigrant children who just showed up, a few days before wearing Nike or name brand clothing. And she was wondering, the question that in her brain that was being rattled around was, do I not matter? Like, do I not matter as a single mom who's also struggling? I feel like my needs are being overlooked for other people who are maybe, in the news cycle, right? And so she's like, where's my help? And I think that when we get into these kinds of conversations, we are a little bit selfish, but part of it is because we're all in survival mode. So it's like, how can I care for you and your dignity if I feel like I don't matter, right? And that's kind of a scary place to be as a society where if you look around, you just feel like most people aren't okay, right?
Because what is a conversation about race except a conversation about individuals seeing that they matter, right? What is a conversation about race except a group of people who have historically felt like they don't matter and have been ostracized in society saying, hey, you don't matter because of the color of your skin or who you love or whatever it is, right? And this is where we've let our anger as a society move us either to, hey, there's nothing to see here, racism's over, right? Get over it, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and move on. Or the other side is that there's no hope at all. The country that we live in, the country that you would move to, all of them are hopeless, in being able to surmount the reality of their hypocrisy and irredeemable, right? So neither one of those frameworks work for helping people to flourish, right, in their lives. And it's comical but in a sadistic kind of way, because the people that are telling us that, hey, you should, that there's nothing to see here, or there's so much to see that it's irredeemable, those people are not speaking for most of us, but they're creating this environment where the rest of us who actually live every day and see hope and courage in other people and see possibility within ourselves and are working hard to really mine for the gold within ourselves that we can see and believe in again. We're not getting that from the media. We're not getting that from institutional leaders, who are getting, whatever their pocketbooks lined, with our own coin that we're giving them to continue to sell us a bill of goods. I mean, billions of dollars going into their pockets so that they could sell us a lie that we're not good enough, that we don't matter, or that other people matter more than others, and make sure you're in the right group, because if you're not, and you're not on the winning team, then you won't exist. right? So fundamentalism now plays a role in this as well. And fundamentalism is basically that if you exist, then that means I can't exist. So I have to exist better and firmer and put a stake in the ground against your existence, right? And that is I mean, that is an apocalyptic way to live, you know? When I think my eschatology, sort of like my theory on the end of times, spiritually tells me that all people are loved and tears will be wiped away and pain and hurt will be healed. There's no room for that type of fundamentalism in a redeemed world, which again is outside of our control, whether or not it happens or not. It's going to happen. I have a deep belief that the redeemable aspects of the world will indeed be redeemed in time in a way in which the Creator has designed them to happen, right? However one sees that, it's my belief and maybe sort of at the core at the anchor of my hope, for the season that we're in. But I'm thinking 50 years down the line, 100 years down the line, I don't take it for granted, that things are just going to be okay. We have to put something in, and costs have to be paid, sacrifices have to be made. For those of us who have enough awareness of our weakness, but some weird, crazy belief, that maybe something exceptional could come through us if we paid the cost,
And is there, as you say that, the idea of a world where, fundamentalism doesn't exist, the tears will be wiped from our eyes. Like, that's not Clark Kent flying in as Superman and scooping us up and flying us out of it. What that is, like, it's not going to be one day we're better, right? I think it takes a huge lift and concerted effort to get to a place where we are mindful enough and considerate enough and kind enough to ourselves that we can extend that to other people. But that's a skill set that a lot of people don't have access to. It's a well that they don't have the depth to draw from. And so, that's, as we're sitting here and starting to record again, that's one of the things that we're doing on this podcast, is trying to demonstrate, what are the thought processes or the internal dialogues or the things that we have to ask, the things we're confronting in ourselves, to kind of model that. We don't have the answers for how to address or tackle or solve racism necessarily, right? Like, there are way better thinkers out there than you or I, and have ideas about systemic issues. What are the culturally, society, like, how do we move beyond? And what are the mechanisms of power that need to be deconstructed? Those are all things we can talk about. But the thing that you and I can do is we can sit here and we can say, what am I confronting as a person? How am I showing up in the world? And really just showing that, or trying to demonstrate that by excavating ourselves in that way, we're not losing ourselves, right? Because that's the thing I think that scares people, is they say, if I take a step out of fundamentalism and outside of my tribe, I'm going to be eaten alive, right? And one way that we can practice that is through interpersonal relationships. I don't even know that we're necessarily very good at it in that respect, right? We see so many divorces and relationships that fall apart, and even COVID exposed how the deepest friendships could be lost just by sheer political disagreement. So I don't even know at an interpersonal level that we're necessarily very good at the repair part. But one thing that I always find is that in dating, and when you come up in a conflict, you have to be like, there's fears that I'm trying to override. And if I want a relationship to experience the depth that it needs to be sustained over a long period of time, I can't just, brush something under the rug if I feel slighted, or if there's conflict, we have to talk it out. Like, why is this conflict occurring? And you have to have someone on the other side of the conversation who's equally willing to show up and repair with you. But there's a certain degree of exposing your neck to that person, and trusting that they're not going to harm you. We can practice that in interpersonal relationships, but if you try to practice that on a macro level, the machine is such that you kind of will be eaten alive. Like, to be honest, you'll lose your livelihood, or you will lose your tribe to an extent. So
we need to say what you just said, Mark. I mean, we don't use language, like we need to, because we just are limited and not skilled at how to use language. But if I'm listening to what you're saying, just to say it back to you a little bit, is we're afraid. We're afraid of losing. Afraid of not being loved, afraid of not experiencing connection, and afraid of being rejected, afraid of being abandoned. I am afraid of all those things. I'm afraid of being alone forever. I'm afraid of not being seen. I'm afraid that what I deeply believe about myself is true, which is that I don't matter. And if there's something that behind the scene has been about, while we've been trying to look behind the curtain of these issues, naturally we have looked behind the curtain of our own issues, right? To see that despite our challenges with other people, we have to see behind, or look behind the curtain, behind what's seen, to value other people. But that is totally connected to us being able to look behind what's in us, behind what we're putting out into the world, to also find something meaningful and valuable and mattering within us. And real humility is about accepting what is true about us. It's not about a denigration of self, It's not a minimizing of self. It's an acceptance of self. It's an acceptance of who and what we are, is true meekness and true humility. And none of us really want to do that, because we'd have to at least control and make uncertainty a friend and all of that, stuff, So we're not trying to do that stuff, man. I bought a PlayStation 5 over the summer. I haven't played video games probably since the original Nintendo or Atari was out in 1980, whatever, I think in retrospect, there were two things I wanted to do. I wanted to numb my brain, a little bit more with something different than just Netflix and HBO Max and blah, 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 whatever. And I also wanted to control something. I was like, I'm going to beat this game. I needed to be successful. So now I've gone through 3 games, and have beat it is kind of cool, actually. It is fun and entertaining. Nothing against video games. I'm going to find out something else to buy. But the reality is that now I'm hooked on beating something, and winning something, or being in control of something, that I don't like the uncertainty of life. So let me create some certainty with this game, that I'm doing. Now, what's funny about that is I'm actually learning some skills around delaying gratification and all of that. When you were a kid and you'd have to play sorry or something like that. I'd work with kids sometimes who couldn't play that game because of something bad happened. Namely, if they didn't win, then I'd work with some kids, who would toss the board over and throw the little pawns and beat up the person, who did whatever, that kind of stuff where you don't regulate your own emotions or delay gratification, only to realize that as an adult, I don't delay gratification at all. I just want what I want when I want it, And if I feel like I can't win, then I'll do crazy things as an adult with adult sized consequences, like cutting off relationships, not being accountable, telling myself a story about how important I am when I'm really not that important on the whole. Doesn't mean that I don't matter. It just means no one gives a fuck. Right? I don't, if you've read, the subtle art of not giving a fuck, which is this great book that I thought was about sticking to the man just by the title. No, it was The Subtle Art of Not Caring as Much About Yourself is really what it is. It's the subtle art of thinking, of being set free from thinking that you're exceptional when you're not. You're not exceptional. I'm not exceptional. But we can be a channel for exceptional shit to come through us, but we are not like exceptional, and we need to release ourselves from that burden.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, even calling it a burden, like just thinking highly of yourself is, that is a burden.
Oh,
because then you have to constantly live up to this idea to prove it. That's the hard thing, but it's easier to kind of die to yourself and be like, man, I'm not hot shit. I am.
You're not hot shit, Mark?
I'm not hot shit.
Shit.
Recording
it's a rude awakening in New York, I tell you what,
oh
because I'm like, everybody's
goodness.
like so good looking here, for the most part, and so interesting and so compelling, and in a city of 8.6 million people, you can get lost, and in DC it was the same. I mean, it could easily get lost. It's 750,000 people in DC. It was easy to get lost.
So we're coming up on some time, but want to leave some people with takeaways. I think the biggest takeaway is like, one, how do you stop caring about yourself so much? Because that's a paradox, right? In order to actually take care of yourself, you have to, like you said, unburden yourself from thinking so highly of yourself. So that's the conundrum, is that you actually have to think of yourself less and look out for other people. And then hope that will be reciprocated, right? I think life shows us time and again that like the less we think of ourselves and the more we give and care for others, the more we feel that'll be reciprocated, the more we feel that someone else is looking out for us. It's just more difficult to see if you have your own like myopic goggles on or blinders on and so focused on your own needs. Look up a little bit and see where you can care for others. Volunteering is such a good way to do that. And really, those are just the things that are super accessible if you're not, that you can get out and do this weekend, right? You can go volunteer at a soup kitchen and just get out of that a little bit. And that's an exercise that you can do. If you are struggling with a community where you feel maybe supported in, I think the practice of like beginning something new and being bad at it, like you did with video games, and now you're a little bit more proficient at it.
I was so bad at it.
Yeah. Like go practice, go start something new and be bad at it and just see how others still accept you for who you are. And like realizing that, like I played softball a couple weeks ago for the first time since pre-COVID. Dude, I was so bad. and I was a little embarrassed at how poorly I played. But I showed up this week and I actually gave myself enough time to warm up. It makes a world of a difference. Redeem myself. But the act of showing up and doing something and just being bad at it will do so much for your esteem and unburdening yourself from the idea that you have to be all that in a bag of, what is the saying? All that in a bag of
chips.
I don't know.
The bag of chips,
right.
Bag of saltines, bag of something.
That's right.
I love that, Mark. I mean, showing up bad at something, and I think that is the invitation for sure. We're going to talk about all of the things, over the next few episodes, that we have, and we'll talk about the like systemic challenges in the way that we think, and some of the systems, that we feel like are still challenging for people to find avenues for flourishing in their lives, So yes, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll talk about critical race theory. We'll talk about gender, sexuality, perhaps, all these things are going to come up that are like touch points of pain in the culture, in the global citizenry. But I think what you just said is really key in terms of a takeaway for me. It's show up knowing you're going to be bad. Just, like I said earlier, this is costly, right? And if we're saving face, trying to protect ourselves or preserve ourselves exercising hypervigilance in order to keep ourselves from feeling pain, minimizing other people so that we can feel better about ourselves. When we know we're bad at having these conversations, we know that we would much rather throw that person that you disagree with under the proverbial and sometimes the actual bus. How many people, as soon as Trump's ear got shot with the bullet, did I see that were basically like, oops, sorry that you missed, you know? And I'm just thinking, like, you don't have to love the guy, you know, but he's still somebody's dad, you know, somebody's grandfather, somebody's whatever, you know. And if at any point that I ever wanted to show up as a leader at something, all eyes end up being on you as that leader. 50% of the people are going to love you, 50% are going to hate you. Someone may call you a threat to democracy, an existential threat to democracy. Someone may call you the Hitler, Nazi, socialist, communist, racist, you know? And do I deserve, is it worth it to put a bullet through my head, you know, as a result, you know? The answers to those questions, I don't know if they're answers, but how we address them is going to only start when we decide to show up knowing that we're going to be bad at it. And we have to do it knowing that it's costly, not because it's cutesy, you know? And it's not going to be cute. When the rubber hits the road, we're going to be hurt and mad and all the things are going to come up. The other takeaway, don't think you're hot stuff, right? You're thinking about yourself way more than people are thinking about you. And I love the idea of the volunteerism or participation, right? You know, getting ourselves out there. I think people should expose themselves to their friends in terms of what they think and what they feel, and be honest about stuff. I mean, keep your clothes on. I mean, like expose your heart, expose your condition, you know. And then, you know, if people want to read some books, you know, The Soul Art of Not Giving a Fuck is a good one. And then, you know, Dr. King's, you know, last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Clarity, is another good one, you know, where he talks about a lot of great things, a lot of quotes that you would have heard from Dr. King come out of that book. And I think it's good fodder and good preparation, you know, for the conversations that we're going to have still. And at the end of the day, you know, we're not going to solve it, you know, this year or next. Yes, go vote. By all means, go vote. Vote your conscience, vote your principles, but love your neighbor, and maybe even more to the point, start now loving your enemy and going where your enemies are.
Preach. Another book recommendation, one that I listened to at the beginning of the year. It's been out for a little bit, but it's called 10% Happier. It's written by Dan Harris and his journey. He's a former ABC anchor, correspondent, and it's basically he details how mindfulness and Buddhist principles around meditation really help create that margin in your life to just be a little bit better of a person. That's why the book's called 10% Happier. He's not, you know, it's not a silver bullet. But that's one way that you can, you know, just do meditation and mindfulness can create that buffer between, you know, the reactionary self that we so often show up with first, right? When confronted with something stressful or scary. So, but yeah, man, great stuff. Good to be back in
so good to see you, my friend.
Conversation with you. And yeah, I guess
we do what we do.
We do what we do.
See you on the next episode, I guess. And maybe we need to discover like a sign off here, like Pat Sajak, you know, or somebody, you know, would have a sign off, you know, like peace, love, and soul, or whatever. That was, we need to sign off peace, love, and soul, like Soul Train. That was what they did there. So anyway, audience, we love you, and we're looking forward to engage in this conversation again with you. Welcome back, Mark. It's good to see you.
Yep, likewise. All right, y'all. Talk to you later.